Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. As we continue with Part 14, Freemasonry under the United Grand Lodge, from the Arcane Schools, a review of their origin and antiquity, with a general history of Freemasonry and its relation to the theosophic, scientific and philosophic mysteries by John Yarker. Freemasonry under the United Grand Lodge. A meeting of the United Grand Lodge of Ancient Freemasons of England was held at Freemasons' Hall on the 27th December 1813 to formally consummate the union. The masters, wardens and past masters of the two bodies composing this united assembly had been obligated by the Lodge of Reconciliation on a uniform plan and were admitted by tickets, signed and countersigned by the two secretaries whose names appear to the Articles of Union mentioned in our last chapter, Brothers White and Leslie. The two Grand Masters, namely the Dukes of Sussex and Kent, occupied equal thrones. The Reverend Brother Coughlin, D.D., Grand Chaplain of the Grand Lodge of 1717, proclaimed the confirmation of the articles to which the brethren signified their assent. Then, the Reverend Brother Barry, D.D., Grand Chaplain of the Grand Lodge of 1751, proclaimed the union, after which Brother Wesley performed a symphony on the organ. Other symbolic ceremonies were gone through and the tests were pronounced pure and correct. The grand officers of both bodies now divested themselves of their insignia. The Duke of Kent proposed his brother, the Duke of Sussex, as Grand Master of the United Fraternity. The latter was then obligated, placed upon the throne and proclaimed, after which the Grand Master proceeded to appoint his officers, the Reverend Brother Samuel Hemming, D.D., and Brother Isaac Lindo, Grand Wardens, and the two Grand Secretaries, being those of the former Grand Lodges. The register of the United List of Lodges was settled by drawing lots for precedence, and as that resulted in favor of the 1751 body, its charters obtained a rank in numerical order over those of the other, which still perpetuates a muddle in the chronological position of the lodges. A reference to Brother John Lane's valuable Masonic records indicates that the revised list of the United Grand Lodge included 388 lodges of the 1717 Constitution and 260 lodges of the 1751 Constitution, or a total on the new register of 648 lodges. A new edition of the Constitutions was edited by Brother William Williams and issued in 1815, and which inserts the declaration as to degrees with which we closed our last chapter. The arms adopted by the United Grand Lodge were a quartering of those of the Grand Lodge of 1717 and those of the Grand Lodge of 1751, the first being a differenced coat of those granted to the London Company of Masons in 1472, and the latter being derived from the standards of the four principal tribes of Israel, adapted by Christians to the four evangelists and forming the seal of the Grand Chapter of York, the Grand Lodge seal being the three crowns attributed to Prince Edwin of Deira. Motto, Ode Viditace, hear, see and be silent. A revision of the lectures of the 3 degrees of the craft was committed to the Reverend Brother Samuel Hemming, D.D., chaplain to the Duke of Sussex, who made some progress therein, but is said to have been completed by the Reverend Brother Williams. The system, though exhibiting no great amount of genius, has continued in use to the present day, and though preserving the main features of the older systems, all Christian references were expunged in order to adapt them, in an antiquarian sense, to the supposed constitution of the society by King Solomon, whose throne every worshipful master is fabled to occupy. For some years, the United Grand Lodge continued the even tenor of its way, without much worthy of notice for the historian. On the death of Brother William Preston in 1810, he left £300 in consols, the interest of which was to be devoted to an annual rehearsal of his own system of lectures. On the 8th March 1820, the Grand Master called the attention of Grand Lodge to the death of George III, who had occupied the throne since 1760. And an address of condolence was voted to the Grand Patron of United Freemasonry, now King George IV. This address was presented by the Duke of Sussex on the 10th May 1820, and the royal arms were hereafter engraved on the head of the certificates. A similar address was presented to His Majesty, the Grand Patron, upon the death of HRH, the Duke of Kent, past Grand Master. Between the years 1819 to 1823, a regrettable misunderstanding occurred between the provincial Grand Master of Lancashire and some of the lodges under his sway, the misunderstanding arising in Lodge number 31, meeting at Liverpool. Blame seems to be attributable to all sides alike, and the lodge was erased in 1822. It was followed in 1823 by the erasure of the Sea Captain's Lodge, number 140, which had resolved to stand or fall by number 31. The death of the celebrated traveller Brother Belzoni in 1825 left his widow in straitened circumstances, and the Grand Lodge voted her the sum of £50 and has placed it on record that this brother was made a Mason in the Lodge of the Pyramids at Cairo, and whilst resident at Cambridge had joined the School of Plato Lodge, number 549. Belzoni left behind him some little memento of his Masonic theories, in which he refers to the triangular and the serpent aprons of the Egyptian kings and their initiations. He also expresses an opinion that the invention of the level and plumb are due to Nimrod and Asher. In the year 1829 past, Grand Stewards had permission to wear a jewel. The death of the Grand Patron George IV in 1830 was reported to Grand Lodge 17th July 1830 by his brother the Grand Master, who then read the draft of an address to be presented to King William IV, condoling with him upon the loss of his brother and soliciting that he would extend his patronage to the craft. To this, a reply was received from Sir Robert Peel, dated the 28th July 1830, signifying the King's consent to become Grand Patron. At the beginning of the year 1832, Sir John Soane, the Grand Superintendent of Works, reported the completion of alterations which had been in progress to adapt the new Masonic Hall as a temple exclusively devoted to Masonry, and as the expense of the alterations had been great, he enclosed a draft for 500 pounds towards the cost. In this year 1832, a renumbering of the lodges took place to fill up the vacancies occasioned by lodges which had become extinct. In March 1833, Lord Dundas, the Deputy Grand Master, presented to Grand Lodge on behalf of the Duke of Sussex, Grand Master, a bust of King William IV, the Grand Patron. Also 3 gilt trowels which had been used on the occasions of laying the foundation stones of the London University, the licensed Victuallers Asylum, and the Charing Cross Hospital. In the year 1834, the Freemasons' Quarterly Review was commenced and continued its labours down to 1850, when a new series was begun, since which time the craft has never been without one or more periodicals. The learned brother George Oliver D.D., whose father, the Reverend Samuel Oliver, had been a Mason of the ancient school, since 1823 had published a number of Masonic works. He may be considered the father of Masonic literature, though his works, for want of critical attention, have fallen into much undeserved neglect. Several new lodges were constituted in the provinces in 1834, when the Earl of Durham was Deputy Grand Master, and new Masonic halls were opened at Dorchester and Tiverton. In the month of June 1835, a resolution was passed at a meeting of brothers favourable to the scheme in view, that it is expedient to provide for the wants of the meritorious but aged and decayed Freemasons by the erection of an asylum to receive them within its sanctuary. In December 1835, the Grand Stewards' Lodge celebrated the centenary of its foundation in June 1735 at Freemasons' Hall. Also, the Grand Lodge of Scotland celebrated the centenary of its foundation by a festival on St. Andrew's Day, 1836. In this year, 1836, several foundation stones were laid in England with Masonic ritual and solemnities. The Duke of Sussex, Grand Master, had been for some time in bad health, and the loss of his eyesight was feared. But on the 27th of January, 1837, he was so far recovered as to make his appearance in Grand Lodge, when he received a most cordial and hearty welcome. The Grand Lodge at this period conceived the idea of forming a library. In the year 1838, a magnificent candelabrum, the funds to purchase which had been raised by subscription, was presented to the Grand Master. the Asylum for Aged and Decayed Freemasons, celebrated a festival in June of this year. But later on, in the same year, an opposition to the scheme was raised by the Grand Master, who had formed the impression that it would injure the other charities. But the opposition was withdrawn after some very unpleasant scenes, which for a time affected the Masonic standing of Brother R.T. Crucifix, one of its supporters, and the editor of the Freemasons' Quarterly Review. This asylum was brought into actual operation in 1839, and the Earl of Durham was appointed Pro-Grand Master in the same year. In 1842, the Male Annuity Fund of the Royal Benevolent Institution was established, the Grand Lodge voting it an annual sum of £400. The Duke of Sussex, Grand Master, died on the 21st April 1843, and it then became necessary for the Grand Lodge to elect a Grand Master. Brother Thomas Dundas, Earl of Zetland, was selected for that office, and his installation took place in March 1844. In the same year, a handsome testimonial was presented to Dr. George Oliver. Also, the Duchess of Inverness presented to Grand Lodge the candelabrum which had been given to her husband in 1838. Between the years 1944 to 1947, a certain amount of friction occurred between the Grand Lodges of England and the Royal York of Berlin, owing to the refusal of the latter to acknowledge any other than Christian Freemasons. The difficulty was finally arranged by the Royal York, acceding in a limited measure to the liberal views of this country. Previous to 1847, it was, from olden time, a necessity that a candidate should be freeborn. But in this year it was resolved to substitute the qualification of freeman. In 1849, the Masonic Widows' Annuity Fund was established, and the Queen became Grand Patroness of the Boys' School in 1852. On the 7th of December, 1853, the Grand Master reported to Grand Lodge that he had been under the necessity of suspending Brother William Tucker, the Provincial Grand Master of Dorsetshire, the offence being that he had made his appearance in his Provincial Grand Lodge wearing, in addition to his craft clothing, the insignia of the Christian Orders of Masonry. It is also on record that Brother Tucker had made a point in his address of recommending those higher degrees of Masonry found in the ancient and accepted rite of 33 degrees, which after having met with disfavour from the late Grand Master had been introduced into England from America within 2 years of the death of the Duke of Sussex. On the 4th June, 1856, an attempt was made to foist the ceremonial of the Mark degree into the craft series, but was rejected as an impossibility, as the Articles of Union state that pure Freemasonry consists of 3 degrees and no more. On this occasion, Brother John Henderson, the Grand Registrar, said that no man nor body of men could make such innovation as that proposed without endangering the whole fabric of the institution. The Earl of Dalhousie was appointed Deputy Grand Master in 1857. Between October 1855 and September 1857, many of the Canadian craftsmen withdrew themselves from under our banner, alleging neglect by the officials of Grand Lodge, and thereupon erected a Grand Lodge of their own. This led to the formation of a colonial board in 1856 by the Grand Lodge of England, and the establishment of a second Grand Lodge in Canada. On this occasion, England lost the Canadian lodges, save a few Masons who remained faithful to their old allegiance. The 2 Grand Lodges thus formed in Canada united 14th July 1858 under the designation of the Grand Lodge of Canada. These troubles led to the resignation of Brother White, who had been Grand Secretary since the Union of 1813, and to the appointment in 1857 of Brother William Gray Clark. The nucleus of a Masonic hall was begun in Manchester 27th June 1857 by taking the upper floor of rooms over the shops with an opening at 78 Cross Street and dividing the same into refreshment rooms supplied by a back staircase, a lodge room and a tiler's room. A club also was established. The Liverpool Masonic Temple was commenced in 1858 by the purchase of a building for £1,600. In April 1861, the Earl de Grey and Ripon was appointed the Deputy Grand Master. On the 8th of January 1862, the Grand Lodge voted an address of condolence to the Queen on the death of her consort on 14th December 1861. In July 1862, the Provincial Grand Master of East Lancashire, Brother Stephen Blair, laid the foundation of a Masonic hall at Manchester, the necessary funds being raised by a company of shareholders. On the 3rd December 1862, it was resolved to revise the numbering of the lodges, thus eliminating the vacancies occurring since 1832. The Masonic Hall at Manchester was opened by the Provincial Grand Master, 3rd November 1864. It had been in contemplation to improve the Masonic Hall, London, by separating the tavern entirely from that portion used for Grand Lodge purposes, and on the 27th April 1864, the Earl of Zetland, Grand Master, laid the foundation stone of the new building, which was completed for Masonic purposes in 1866. In 1865, a revision of the Book of Constitutions was made, and it was directed that the term Provincial Grand Master in England should be District Grand Master in the colonies and foreign parts. On the 7th June, 1865, the subject of the Mark degree was again brought under discussion, and it was resolved to refuse recognition to the Mark Grand Lodge, which had been established in 1856, the ceremonial being treated as comparatively modern. The learned brother Dr. George Oliver was interred with Masonic honours in 1867, and on the death of brother William Gray Clark in 1868, brother John Hervey became Grand Secretary. On the 2nd June 1869, the Earl of Zetland, Grand Master, informed the Grand Lodge that HRH, the Prince of Wales, had been received into Freemasonry by the King of Sweden. And in September of the same year, he was elected a past Grand Master of England, and the Prince attended Grand Lodge in December 1869. The number of lodges on the roll had increased from 723 in 1844 to 1,299 in the year 1869. Freemasons' Hall had now been separated from the tavern and was formally inaugurated on the 14th April 1869. On the voluntary resignation of the Earl of Zetland as Grand Master in 1870, a handsome testimonial was arranged and subscriptions obtained. The Earl accepted a silver inkstand and directed that the remainder of the contribution, which amounted to £2,730, should form a fund for the relief of distinguished brethren who might be in distress, and to be named the Zetland Fund. Earl de Grey and Ripon was now nominated to the office of Grand Master, and was installed as such on the 14th May 1870. The Masonic career of this Grand Master, who was made a Marquis for diplomatic services in the United States, was not closed in a manner equally distinguished, as upon his embracing the Roman Catholic faith he resigned his office of Grand Master, 2nd September 1874. Arthur, Duke of Connaught, and Leopold, Duke of Albany, were initiated in 1874, the former in the Prince of Wales Lodge, and the latter in the Apollo University Lodge. The Prince of Wales having already the rank of a past Grand Master of England, a deputation was appointed to interview him upon the acceptance of the office vacated by the Marquis of Ripon. At the meeting of Grand Lodge in December 1874, it was reported that the Prince would accept the Grand Mastership and would appoint the Earl of Carnarvon as Pro-Grand Master and Lord Skelmersdale as Deputy Grand Master. Accordingly, the Prince of Wales was installed Grand Master with great pomp at the Royal Albert Hall, South Kensington, on the 28th April 1875, which was duly commemorated by a painting in oil and an engraved copy of the same. In May of the same year, the Prince was installed Grand Zerubbabel of the Supreme Grand Chapter. His brother, Leopold, Duke of Albany, was installed Provincial Grand Master of Oxfordshire in February 1876. At the meeting of Grand Lodge, April 1877, the Prince of Wales, Grand Master, appointed his brothers, the Dukes of Connaught and of Albany, as his two Grand Wardens, and £4,000 was voted by Grand Lodge to the Royal National Lifeboat Institution. On the 5th December in this year, a committee was appointed to consider the action of the Grand Orient of France in reference to the abolition of the requirement of any special religious belief from candidates for initiation, or as the Grand Lodge preferred to put it, the removal of the name of God from their constitution. And in March 1878, the committee gave in a report denying recognition as true and genuine brethren to those so initiated. In 1879, Brother John Hervey, whose death took place the following year, resigned the office of Grand Secretary, and Colonel Shadwell H. Clerk was appointed. On the 1st June 1881, the list of Grand Officers was increased by adding a Deputy Master of Ceremonies and 2 Grand Sword Bearers. In 1882, the Prince of Wales, Grand Master, was present at Grand Lodge with his 2 brothers, when a congratulatory address was voted to the Queen on her escape from the danger of assassination. In 1883, a new edition of the Book of Constitutions was issued. The Great Hall at Freemasons' Hall in London was destroyed by fire, and the Society lost the Duke of Albany by death, 28th March, 1884. On the 28th of November, 1884, a charter was granted for the Quatuor Coronati Lodge, number 2076, Brother Sir Charles Warren being the first worshipful master. The object of the lodge, besides the ordinary routine of such bodies, being the increase of Masonic knowledge by competent lectures at each meeting. The publication of the same in a journal entitled Ars Quatuor Coronatorum, and the reprint of our ancient manuscripts and other works in volumes designated Quatuor Coronatorum Antigraphia. One of their first developments was the establishment by the late Brother G.W. Speth, the Secretary of the Lodge, of a correspondence circle which now numbers over 3,000 members. In the year 1884, Grand Lodge passed a resolution of remonstrance against the Pope's encyclical denouncing Freemasonry, and a new edition of the Arch Regulations was prepared. At a meeting of Royal Alpha Lodge, London, on the 17th March 1885, the Prince of Wales Grand Master himself initiated his eldest son, Prince Albert Victor, and in 1887 conferred upon him the office of Senior Grand Warden. The new Great Hall was completed in 1885, and on the 22nd June 1886, the Prince of Wales Grand Master installed his brother, the Duke of Connaught, as Provincial Grand Master of Sussex. On the 1st June 1887, Brother Henry Sadler was appointed Sub-Librarian of Grand Lodge, which was a poor affair for so wealthy a body, but which Brother Sadler has done much to improve and is himself the author of some valuable works, as Masonic Facts and Fictions, Life of Thomas Dunkerley, Notes on the Ceremony of Installation, Portrait of Grand Master Sayer, Catalogue of Grand Lodge Library, etc. In this year, 1887, Brother R.F. Gould completed the last volume of his well-known History of Freemasonry. On the 13th June, 1887, a grand Masonic celebration of Her Majesty's Jubilee was held at the Royal Albert Hall under the presidency of H.R.H., the Prince of Wales as Grand Master, when an address, handsomely illuminated on vellum for presentation to Her Majesty the Queen, was read to the assembly, and a special jewel was presented to the Grand Master, such as might be worn by all Masons who were subscribing members of any lodge at the time. At a meeting of Grand Lodge, 6th June 1888, the rank of past Grand Master was conferred upon Oscar II, King of Sweden and Norway, Grand Master or Vicarius Salomonis in those countries. Between the 4th and 7th of June in this year, the Royal Masonic Benevolent Institution for Girls celebrated its centenary at the Royal Albert Hall. The 4th was the prize distribution day, at which were present the Prince and Princess of Wales, and the Princesses Louise, Victoria, and Maud. On the 7th, the Prince of Wales presided and was supported by the King of Sweden and various notables of the English craft. In December 1890, the Prince of Wales Grand Master installed his eldest son, Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence and Avondale, as Provincial Grand Master of Berkshire. Unfortunately, his tenure of that office was very short, as he died on the 14th January 1892. The death of Brother Shadwell H. Clerk, the Grand Secretary, on the 25th December 1891, led to the appointment to that office of Brother Edward Letchworth. On the 27th January 1892, the Grand Lodge voted an address of condolence to the Queen and to the Prince of Wales Grand Master on the lamented death of the Duke of Clarence and Avondale, and the whole craft followed this example. The Jubilee of the Royal Masonic Benevolent Institution was celebrated the 24th February of this year at the Covent Garden Theatre, with the Earl of Mount Edgecombe as president, when the unprecedented sum of £59,593.15 was contributed. In December 1892, Grand Lodge again agreed to enlarge the number of Grand Officers by the addition of a Deputy Grand Registrar, a Deputy Grand Sword-Bearer, additional Grand Deacons, and Grand Directors of Ceremonies. The like appointments to extend to provincial Grand Lodges, according to their numerical strength. During this year, the question of admitting Jews as Freemasons was agitated in Prussia, and a new lodge was established for the special purpose of such initiations. It is, however, outside a work of this nature to print the ordinary and recent outline of the routine of Freemasonry, which must give the world the idea that all is pomp, parade, man-millinery and banqueting. Matters of this sort can be gathered from the ordinary Freemasons' journals, which make it their business to report every detail for the edification of the members of lodges. With the great increase that is constantly taking place in the numbers of lodges, innovations are constantly being introduced of a doubtful character, not calculated for the good of the society. We will, however, mention a few more items of general interest. At a meeting of Grand Lodge, 19th April 1896, the rank of Past Grand Officer was conferred upon 21 distinguished Masons, in commemoration of the 21 years during which the Prince of Wales had filled the Grand Mastership. A commemoration festival was held on the 14th June 1897 at the Royal Albert Hall in honor of Her Majesty, the Queen having attained the 60th year of her reign, and which was one of the finest spectacles on record. Another, worthy of record, was the Festival of the Royal Masonic Institution for Boys on the 10th July 1898, under the presidency of the Grand Master at the Royal Albert Hall, London, when the unprecedented sum of £141,000 was reported as subscribed for the purpose of erecting new school buildings and removing the school to Bushey, near Watford. At the meeting of Grand Lodge on the 7th September 1898, terms were proposed and passed for the recognition of the sometime established Grand Lodge of New Zealand. On the 12th May 1900, the foundation stone was laid at Bushey of the new Royal Masonic Institution for Boys. The inscription upon the plate deposited was as follows: "This stone was laid on the 12th May, Anno Domini 1900, with Masonic ceremonial by H.R.H., the Duke of Connaught and Strathearn, K.G., etc., etc., Grand Master, President of the institution." The death of H.M. Queen Victoria occurring on the 22nd January 1901, with the accession of the Prince of Wales as Edward VII, caused his resignation as Grand Master on the 15th February, upon which the Duke of Connaught was nominated as Grand Master and was installed 17th July 1901 in the Royal Albert Hall. The prosperity of the craft for many years has been progressive and uninterrupted in its numerical accessions, and since 1869, when the lodges were renumbered to the day we write, some 1,500 lodges are added to the roll. The advance in its literary efforts has kept pace with the numerical increase in its lodges, though Freemasons as a body are very indifferent to its literature. The Quatuor Coronati Lodge has distinguished itself by the issue of numerous facsimiles of ancient manuscripts, reproduced with great care and in the most beautiful style. It has completed 20 volumes of its transactions, lectures and papers distinguished by the accuracy and soundness of their information and the excellence of the workmanship, and it has thus been the means of spreading sound and reliable Masonic literature over all the world. And we have been much indebted to its papers in compiling this book. In equally good style, the Newcastle College of Rosicrucians has produced facsimiles of ancient manuscripts, besides their ordinary transactions. The Rosicrucian College of London has also published valuable papers. The West Yorkshire Provincial Library, established by the exertions of Brother Watson, the Provincial Grand Secretary and Librarian, has reproduced 9 copies of the constitutional charges at the cost of the Provincial Grand Master, the late Brother Tew. The York brothers have published a similar volume of the old charges by subscription. Other valuable works have proceeded from the pens of brothers James Hewen, Kenneth R.H. Mackenzie, Robert Freak Gould, W. Wynne Westcott, M.B., G.W. Speth, John Strachan, Q.C., Henry Sadler, John Lane, W.J.C. Crawley, L.L.D., G.W. Bain, and many others too numerous to mention. Also some reprints of old plates, books, and documents. The Quatuor Coronati Lodge, 2076, however, has had the great misfortune to lose one of its most valued pillars. Brother G.W. Speth, 19th April 1901, in his 54th year, and the lodge erected, by subscription, a monument. The death of the treasurer followed on the 4th June 1901, viz. Sir Walter Besant, in his 65th year. In 1905, Brother R.F. Gould published his Concise History of Freemasonry. Another notable event of the time was the establishment by Mrs. Besant of a Supreme Grand Council 33rd degree in London under authority from India, which received it from a dissension which occurred in the Supreme Grand Council 33rd degree of France. It confers all its degrees indiscriminately upon males and females, and works the craft degrees under the ritual of the Grand Lodge of England, and at the present time has numerous adherents and lodges. It is added only to the Ritual Adama lecture, which compares Masonry with secret societies of India and takes the name of co-Masonry. Even this may aid in rousing amongst Freemasons a more intellectual standard of labor. Possibly, if Masonry was less of a political machine, officered from the court, and its high officials elected by the craft for merit alone, we should see a better state of things than now exists. A section of the press is now agitating against Freemasonry, assigning as grounds that the worst men are employed by our municipal councils to the detriment of non-Masons. On the other hand, a very worthy brother who was initiated in the same lodge as myself was complaining against the carelessness in inquiry into the character of candidates. I replied that this was so, but although I had been 55 years a Mason and had been deluged from every part of the world with unsolicited honors, I was pleased to say that in all these years I never, in a single instance, met with any one Mason with an eye to my worldly interests. Hence, I utterly disbelieved those assertions that good men were ousted in the interests of Masons. In all these years, the old operative guilds of Freemasons have continued their work without changing the secrecy of their proceedings. They have their lodges in London, Leicester, Norfolk, Derbyshire, Holyhead, York, Durham, Berwick, and elsewhere. Some of these are in a languishing condition, but they exist and are in course of galvanization. Of late years, they seem to have become disgusted with the vain pretensions of modern speculative Freemasonry, and under authority of the three co-equal Grand Master Masons of the South and North, have to some little extent relaxed the secrecy of their proceedings. And though the greater part of their members are utterly averse to anything whatever being made public, possibly in time these restrictions will be further modified to the advantage of the speculative system of 1813, for many parts are quite incomprehensible, even to learned Freemasons, without the technical part, which only the guilds of the Freemasons can supply. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment, and if you can please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.